Okay, thanks everybody. Welcome to our first branch meeting, New York City branch meeting of 2021. Really appreciate you being here in our new virtual format. Really excited to be here today and glad you all could join for, I think, a pretty exciting agenda that we're gonna put forward for tonight. So let me, if I get this right, share my screen, if I can do it here. There we go. We'll do this. And I think we are good here. All right. So today's presentations will be around asset management in the wastewater industry. We're super excited to have a bunch of folks from a relatively new industry to this group. And as most of you know already, likely, even though the assets are different in different industries, the problems are likely the same. So what we're hoping is by expanding, we have the unique opportunity in the asset management world by expanding our industry view of getting more and more best practice, more and more help in trying to achieve what we're all trying to achieve, kind of hitting that asset management nirvana. So we're super excited to have a bunch of folks in the area talk about their wastewater journeys in asset management, and glad to have that kind of expand from our traditional transportation-focused groups. So that being said, we're just going to do a quick introduction, myself and Sean, talk about a couple branch updates. Sean, I was wrong before. We're going to toss to Amy after that, and then we'll start the presentations. And then if we have time at the end, we will have questions for the presenters that we'll have to run through the chat and the questions that you should see in your control panel. I'm not sure how everybody sees it on their screen, but there is a control panel on the right where we'll be watching questions and things like that. So in your control panel, there should be a chat. In there, you can send chat messages to the entire audience. You can send them to certain people. So I will be monitoring that during the presentations. And as we get to the questions for the presenters at the end, we'll try to consolidate similar questions and run through that way, assuming we have time. If there's any issues or anything that you're having with audio, with hearing anybody, please put those in the chat as well, and we can talk amongst ourselves to get folks to change or do something to try to make that better. So I think that pretty much orients us to the event. And again, if there's any other questions that I didn't hit on, feel free to put those in the chat as well. So a couple branch updates. This will be the last branch meeting that I will be attending as the branch lead. I am taking on a role with the IAM Executive Committee and excited to do that. So in my place, we've found somebody to take it over. His name is Shandan Chadwani. I'm not sure if he's on. I didn't look through, I didn't see it before, but you will be hearing from Shandan in the near future, I'm sure. And Sean's going to continue in the co-leadership role as well. So with that being said, I will toss it over to Sean, who has another update, and then we will have an update from Amy from the executive committee.
Great, thanks very much, David. Can everyone hear me okay? Good.
Sound good.
I always ask because one time I was halfway through a presentation and people were saying, we can't hear you. Good evening, thanks for joining. Like David, I'm very happy that we have some new faces to our group and a new industry. It's what's been fascinating to me in my experience in asset management is that the different areas of focus with different industries, and it's always beneficial for us to learn from each other. And with the wastewater industry that we have here, it's certainly new to me. I've seen some other, I had a little bit of exposure to oil and gas, a little bit of exposure to nuclear, both of which focus on different areas, but wastewater will be a very good thing for us to see as well, and that we'll all be able to benefit from. The one update that I wanted to share also right now, the IAM is continuing to mature, and I know that in some areas, some of the chapters are sort of reformulating and sort of redefining their areas. So I actually made a request upon talking it through with David and some others. I thought it would be beneficial to actually have the chapter named the New York and New Jersey chapter. And it has nothing to do with the fact that I work for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, nothing at all. But I just thought it would be beneficial to sort of represent the whole region and sort of cast the net a little bit wider. So that's something that I understand is being being passed through the channels, and hopefully in the group that David's moving to, he's in a position that he can help help that happen. Also, I wanted to thank David very much, who really has taken a senior leader role to my junior leader role to date in the chapter. And I'll have to step it up a little bit, and I'll be leaning on some people to help me do that. And I'm looking forward to working with Chandan very much.
He's being too kind. He does a lot of work too, so we both put it in. So
so with that, you'll hear more as we hear from that item regarding the naming of the chapter, and that's what I have. So with this, I will turn the mic over to Amy.
Thanks, Sean. And thanks for inviting me to be here today. I'm gonna try to, let me see, show my screen, which screen? Let's go for this. There we go. All right, so hopefully you guys see a screen that says agenda on it.
Yes.
Nice, all right, super. So just wanted to do a quick flyby overview of the USA chapter. I'm Amy Lindblom. I'm the chapter chair for the IAM USA chapter, just fresh into the role as of January. I've been with the IAM since 2013, 2014, started the San Francisco Bay Area branch. I live in the Seattle area now. My day job is I'm the director for asset management at Sound Transit, which is the local transit authority in the Seattle area. So just a quick little overview of the chapter, talk a little bit about the member levels, different member levels and benefits available to you as an IAM member, talk a little bit about upcoming events, there's a lot, and finally close out with how you can sign up, make sure that you're getting all the communications and event notices that are relevant to you that you want to see. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to pop them into the system. All right, so this is the landscape of the IAM in the US. We have 8 folks on the executive committee for the US. David's just joined us, we're really excited about that. We currently have 13 branches established across the country, and 3 that are interested in becoming branches. We also have an active Next Gen group, which I think many of you in New York are probably familiar with that. It's primarily where we've been operating Next Gen. Next Gen is really focused on folks who are new to asset management or early in their career, really looking to foster and get more folks engaged in asset management early on, and making sure that they feel supported and able to really make a difference in asset management. Also, Women in Asset Management is another group that's active in the US and in Canada. And similar to Next Gen, this group is really focused on supporting and enabling women in the asset management community, making sure that our asset management community is inclusive and supportive of women. We have over 500 members in the US currently, and that number continues to go up. So the different member levels we have, the 4 member levels. There's a student level, associate member, and fellow. And there's different kinds of criteria once you get into like member level or fellow member. Basically ties back to the number of years of experience you have in asset management. So some of the benefits that you have available to you as a member, of course, includes discounts to books or publications. For example, the subject-specific guides are a really good resource. I know I use them quite a bit. Discounts for IAM conferences or events. We'll talk about the upcoming North America conference at the end of this. We also have Assets Magazine. So if you want to geek out in your free time about asset management, there's Assets Magazine for you. And also you get information about upcoming events. And I'll talk a little bit more about how you can make sure you're getting all of the communications that are relevant to you later on this presentation. I'll also talk later on about how you can volunteer to contribute to the body of knowledge that the IAM continues to curate and update and put out there. And right now we have a series of webinars that the IAM produces, and in the near future we're going to look at making those available to members only. So be on the lookout for that. As far as upcoming events, now one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that all of our members, all of our meetings are virtual, and that really opens the door for us to engage as an asset management community in a way we haven't before, right? So before, our branch meetings were very much a local event. Now that they're all virtual, I can join you in New York. I'm joining San Diego tomorrow. It's fantastic. So I want to make sure that you all were aware of everything that's going on as far as branch meetings, webinars, and other meetings coming up in the near future. So these are all of the events that we currently have posted on the IAM webpage. Feel free to go there, take a look, read through a little bit more detail about each of these events and sign up if it's of interest to you. There's a lot of really interesting conversations happening. So maybe I'll see you tomorrow in San Diego. As far as webinars go, we do have a webinar scheduled for March 23rd coming up here. So for those of you, you probably have heard about the GFMAM, the Global Forum on Maintenance and Asset Management, this kind of like global consortium of different asset management groups that I am included that contribute to this body of knowledge for what are some best practices in asset management and maintenance. So this webinar is going to be talking about how to understand it, how to use it, how to apply it. And as I mentioned before, we are still planning on having our North America conference in October. We're currently planning on a hybrid physical and virtual event. For the folks that can travel, we're going to be on site in Denver, Colorado. And yeah, the conference committee is currently working on the themes, and then there'll be a call for papers and presentations following that. So be on the lookout for that. Talks about communications and making sure that you know where to go to find all of the information available about events and whatnot. The way to do that is to make sure that you are signed up and all your preferences are correct in the system. So the next time you log on to the IAM, maybe just check your preferences to make sure that you know you're getting the information you want. So you do that by going to My Preferences. If you want to be informed on a call for papers, IAM events, toggle these on or off. You can also select to be notified of different chapter events, specific branch events, and again, you know, selecting all the ones that you want to see. Important thing is to click Update when you're done making all of your selections. It kind of is like pressing the Save button after you make some edits to a document. Make sure you do that before you exit. And finally, for the members, you may have seen an email from Andy Watts come out in the past week. We've recently launched a volunteer portal from the IAM. So if you want to contribute to any of the standing committees or developing knowledge for the IAM, you can volunteer for those opportunities through this volunteer portal. So we're currently actively recruiting volunteers for the Knowledge Leadership Group. So some of the things that the Knowledge Leadership Group are working on right now is contributing to the update to the Global Forum and on maintenance and asset management body of knowledge. Also looking on developing some knowledge and content around resilience as an example. We're also developing some bite-sized webinars. These are 15-minute webinars, kind of like quick hot topics that we can do a webinar for. We're also looking for volunteers to participate in the qualifications, training and professional development committee, the membership committee, events committee, lots of stuff. And we're always looking for folks who are interested in leading branches. So if you know folks, maybe not in New York, but in some other areas that might want to start a branch and lead a branch, yeah, definitely encourage them to reach out. You can either reach us through the email address there at the bottom of the screen, or you can go directly to the volunteers portal at the web link listed below there. And that's my quick update.
Great.
All right. Thank you, Amy. And Sean, you want to continue on then?
Sure. I'll introduce our first speaker, and then
Awesome.
each speaker can introduce the next. I'll be introducing Matt Manchisi. David and I were approached by Matt just a few months ago, who was interested in getting involved in the chapter and just sort of learning about what's happening in the region, and some really great energy. And I'd be thrilled if Matt got more involved as we move forward. He has a lot great background to offer, and has good experience in a couple of different areas. Thanks for reaching out, Matt, and a great opportunity to throw you right in and get you involved. Feel free to give some more background about yourself, but from Kimley Horn is Matt Manchisi. Matt?
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, thanks. Thank you both, Sean and David. As Sean had said, I reached out just a few months ago to get more active with IAM, and they almost immediately presented this idea of doing asset management in wastewater for the spring webinar. And so with mostly a predominantly wastewater background, I was very interested, and I think they put together a great program. Without further ado, you guys can see my presentation now, right?
Yep.
Yes.
So I'm going to start things off with sort of an overview of asset management in the wastewater industry. I'm not going to get too specific. I'm going to kind of try to talk high level nationally, and then have the other speakers kind of start to get a little bit more specified. As far as drivers and trends, one of the biggest drivers is going to be external forces, regulatory compliance type of initiatives. The speaker right after me, actually, Carrie Smith, she's with New York State DEC. She'll give a little bit more on the regulatory side for New York, but every state regulates asset management in the wastewater industry a little bit differently. There could be some carrot type of initiatives of like the New York State DEC had a pilot program where they provided asset management programs for various municipalities. On the stick side of things, some states are tying funding to whether or not a utility has an asset management program. Asset condition, especially up here in the Northeast, aging, deteriorating infrastructure is a huge issue in the water wastewater industry. We can't fix every pipe when it approaches the end of its useful life, so we kind of have to figure out how best to prioritize which assets need our attention first and foremost. Efficiency, just in general, trying to do more with finite or reduced budgets, and sort of just applying a little bit more of a business-like culture to the way we run our capital and operations and maintenance programs. And finally, service levels. The old mantra in wastewater was if we're out of sight, out of mind, that's exactly where we want to be. And these days, customers are a little bit more knowledgeable. They're a little bit more sophisticated. They care. They want to know what's going on. Where is the wastewater going? Is it polluting watersheds and that sort of stuff? So providing metrics and providing outward communication is a huge driver for asset management in the wastewater industry. Lots of different trends. Data is one of the big ones here. Everybody has a ton of data, especially with cloud-based stuff, and so making sure that you're actually using the data in an effective way. As I kind of said during the asset condition driver, focusing on capital planning and justifying your projects and prioritizing the right projects and making sure that your spending makes sense and is justifiable to your stakeholders. And embracing asset management as an organizational model, which on this next slide, I'll talk about the various approaches that that utilities take to apply asset management. And so on that organizational model one, and none of these is needs to be the single, this is how I'm going to apply asset management. You can sort of use any kind of combination of these. You can use all of them. You can use a couple of them. But one way to approach asset management would just be to hire an asset management manager, or to create an organizational group that's focused on asset management. And obviously, one of the advantages of doing something like that is it provides a single point or a group accountability, someone who's actually going to be championing and driving your asset management program. There's the technology approach. You can procure a computerized maintenance management system or some sort of technological solution and build your program around that. There's the pilot approach, where you can either take a section of your assets and do some sort of proof of concept. On the flip side of that, instead of doing it just on one piece, you can try to build one component of your asset management program, and kind of start on, as an example, maybe you want to just focus on getting your asset inventory as efficient and as accurate and as reliable as you can. And so you start there and then just kind of build on the next steps after that. And then there's the operational or ground up method, where you actually have the staff lead initiatives. One that immediately comes to mind would be just efficiency as far as condition assessments go. Your operations staff touches your assets more than anybody else. And so having them kind of create additional asset attribute data, or refining the asset attribute data, and just getting their hands on the equipment and letting you know what needs to be done first is an effective way to create an asset management program. I'm going to kind of quickly go through basically 5 different methods for creating or focus areas for creating asset management programs, starting with strategy. Most or all asset management programs focus on kind of the same 5 or 6 different questions. And so the strategy is basically the same regardless of which framework you're using. ISO 55000 or EPA has their method. There's a ton of different methods, but they all, the center or the core of it is trying to move your processes from a reactive process to proactive. So fixing things before they break, trying to reduce the amount of emergency spending, managing risk, and just getting your long-range funding needs under development. The 5 or 6 questions that I was alluding to before are right here. What do we have? What are our assets, and what condition are they in? How and when should we repair, replace them? What'll it cost? What's their estimated useful life? How do we prioritize various assets? And then most importantly, how do we sustain the program? Just answering all of those first 5 questions in a snapshot is great, but if you don't actually have a way to sustain that program, to update it on a continual basis, your asset management program is not gonna succeed. It's not something that needs to sit on a shelf. As far as developing strategy, maturity assessment is a standard way to kind of it's basically a gap assessment. So you take a look at what your existing business practices are, and you compare them against a standardized framework such as ISO 55000. No matter what level of, no matter how mature your asset management program is, a maturity assessment is always beneficial, because it takes a snapshot of where you are, and it also gauges where you want to be in the short, medium, and long term. So it just helps to kind of focus on which initiatives you need to improve on the best, and where you are and where you want to be. Business planning and risk assessments. There's a couple different, this is sort of probably the biggest basket as far as those 5 topics. There's a couple different things that kind of fall under business planning. As I had kind of talked about before, organizational roles and responsibilities, just figuring out who is responsible for what, when are they responsible for it, setting up kind of deadlines or timelines as far as goals, and just setting the right people for the right tasks. As far as the whole technology approach, it's great to rely on computerized maintenance management systems or various technological solutions, but if you don't actually do the legwork of figuring out what are the business, functional, and information requirements of the different systems that you're planning on using, you might end up with something that you didn't intend to have, or maybe you just didn't select the best system. And so tying your organizational goals to those functional and various requirements just helps as far as setting up the right system. And then risk assessment is, this one's a huge one. There should probably, well, I think there are multiple presentations exclusively focused on this, but risk assessments apply to organizations, they can apply to assets, but the whole point of them is to identify which, in the case of asset management, which assets, which infrastructure has the highest both probability and consequence of failure, and what are the steps that I can take to mitigate that. As you can kind of see on the right there, there's a bunch of different impact types, and then probabilities are relatively straightforward. Is it likely to fail or is it unlikely? And so coming up with mitigation controls to sort of reduce that overall risk, either by reducing the probability of failure or the consequence of it when it does fail. Infrastructure planning and condition assessment, this is kind of the biggest area of focus as far as asset management is concerned in the wastewater industry, because the biggest assets we have is typically our infrastructure as far as asset management programs are concerned. And so there's a bunch of different tools within our industry, within many industries, building information modeling, CAD, BIM, Revit systems, GIS, and then a computerized maintenance management system. The main functions for a maintenance management system is really the bulk of it's the work order management. But one of the huge advantages of having a good CMMS system, especially if you've got legacy work order management data, is the ability to utilize that data to do any kind of predictive analytics on when things are going to fail or which assets require more attention than others, because that can help you as far as doing your operations and maintenance planning and your capital planning. As far as pipeline systems, I threw some example attribute data up there and some of the purposes for it, and then a typical asset hierarchy. But so not to spend too much time on this slide. The next part of the whole infrastructure evaluation being condition assessments, especially in the water wastewater industry, there is a ton of different condition assessment types. We do field ones, tabletop. We use CCTV videos for inspections of pipelines. You can do performance and diagnostic testing on both pipelines and at treatment plants. You can do measure how a pump is performing, tying sensors to VFDs or that type of thing. And then you can also, based on where your focus is, there's obviously a bunch of different disciplines involved in the wastewater industry. And so having an inspection that's based on a mechanical assessment, electrical and INC, instrumentation and controls, and or structural, or any combination of those. Decision support tools. Really the goal of decision support tools is to take all of that data that we've accumulated through all of the other efforts that we've done related to asset management and start analyzing them. So coming up with funding requirements and optimizing your investment decisions. You can use some of that risk and condition data to sort of set thresholds for which assets require attention. And you can rank your investment needs based on either condition, risk, or some combination thereof. business case evaluation forms. Those are good for capital projects in terms of ranking them. There's a lot of different criteria you can rank them on. On the screen here, I've got a couple different examples just based on physical conditions, scoring it from on a 1 through 5. And it's basically the goal of this is to try to come up with an objective scoring system for something that may be a little bit more subjective, but trying to objectify the scoring as much as possible. And then just using various decision support tools to kind of run different models and what if scenarios to kind of just gauge what if I am able to either increase my capital budgets by X%, or on the flip side, what if I have to decrease it? What does that do to my assets over the next year, 5 years, 10 years, etc. And then lastly, which sort of ties into the decision support, but business intelligence and performance reporting. Various business intelligence applications, such as Microsoft Power BI or Tableau, they have tremendous applications or applicability within the wastewater industry. Can be used to manage or to monitor service levels. You can put these dashboards right up on a website so that customers can see how you're performing against your externally focused metrics. You can track your O&M programs performance. You can manage various capital programs or just projects in general, project performance. The list of uses for this type of these type of dashboards is endless. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Carrie Smith.
Thank you, Matt. Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Looking good.
Great. All right. All right. Well, thank you, Matt, for that good overview. I think that was helpful just to set the stage for the rest of our presentation. As Matt said, my name is Carrie Smith. I'm a professional engineer at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, otherwise known as DEC. And today I'm going to be sharing some of the asset management initiatives that we've been taking in New York State as they relate to wastewater utilities. The presentation series for today really revolves around a central important concept. Wastewater utilities provide essential services. Unfortunately, as Matt said, when we do our job well, no one thinks about wastewater or infrastructure needs. And we at DEC see asset management as a way to support and articulate the needs of our wastewater utilities and improve our ability to prevent and mitigate pollution. This is an overview of what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm first going to be providing a bit of some regulatory background, specifically for those who are in attendance who may not be as familiar with the wastewater sector. And this is very specific to New York State, so other states are different. I'm also going to be providing a timeline of events that led us down the asset management path, and it's a shortened timeline as an FYI. I'm going to be answering a couple of questions about, what is DEC's role in utility asset management and where we are now. I'm also going to share the case study of the pilot program, and I will also share our next steps. So as with any sector, we in the wastewater sector have a lot of acronyms. I think it's helpful to see the relative responsibilities of each of the entities involved in wastewater management. The United States Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, is responsible for administering the objectives of the Clean Water Act and the programs that fall within it. One of those programs is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NIPDES program, which is meant to regulate the discharge of wastewater to waters of the United States. EPA also manages the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program, which provides funding to water and wastewater programs across the United States. Stepping into the circle, DEC has many functions within air, remediation, as well as water, and DEC is a delegated NIPDES authority, which means that we are responsible for managing the state version of the NIPDES program, otherwise known as the State Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Program, or SPDES. The SPD's program largely mirrors the NIPD's program, except that we have expanded our authority to regulate discharges to waters of the state, which includes groundwater. The NIPD's program actually only includes surface waters. The Division of Water, the next step in the circle, carries out many of the responsibilities that are identified in the Clean Water Act. Within Division of Water, it is the Bureau of Water Permits and Bureau of Water Compliance, BWP and BWC, that largely administer the requirements of the SPD's program. I also have the Environmental Facilities Corporation pictured here because they are a partner agency that administers those Clean Water State Revolving Funds that I mentioned earlier. And actually, some different states will combine both EFC and DEC into one agency, but we have separated those responsibilities. Now, you might be thinking, Carrie has not mentioned asset management once yet. Where does it fit in? And this slide connects the dots. Again, wastewater infrastructure is very much meant to be out of sight, out of mind until something goes wrong. In 2011 and 2012, there were a series of climatic events, including Hurricane Irene, Tropical Storm Lee, and Hurricane Sandy, that highlighted infrastructure issues within New York State, and not just within the wastewater sector, but we were certainly affected. In 2012, Governor Andrew Cuomo formed the 2100 Commission, whose purpose was to look at infrastructure needs in New York and identify areas where resilient concepts could be incorporated. In 2013, the Commission released its recommendations. Among those recommendations was one that was specific to the wastewater sector. It stated that the state should assist municipalities in the development of asset management plans for their wastewater infrastructure. Separately, also in 2013, DEC established a wastewater infrastructure subcommittee due to a growing concern that DEC would never be able to get ahead of wastewater needs without incorporating proactive management strategies to prolong the life of infrastructure. We need to break the cycle. In 2014, Congress passed a new requirement for recipients of those DWSRF loans to develop fiscal sustainability plans, aka asset management plans. In 2015, DEC released its first guidance document for asset management, and we relied on our authority included in 6 NYCRR, Part 750 2.8, which is specific to operation and maintenance, and it specifically talks about properly operating and maintaining infrastructure to keep in a state of good repair, which we interpreted as meaning an asset management program. In 2017, DEC and EFC jointly started an asset management pilot program, and I will be going into that more in a little bit. And in 2021, in about 14 days, our pilot program ends. So what is DEC's role within the world of wastewater utility asset management? We see our role as twofold. We want to support wastewater utilities from the bottom up by providing specific criteria and guidance, and we want to ensure continued use through a top-down or big picture approach. A part of DEC's role is providing resources to support asset management program development and identify areas that can be standardized. Why is standardization important? Well, some wastewater utilities are going to be self-starters and will have fewer barriers to asset management program development and successful implementation. They may have more organizational support, which is very important in a successful asset management program. And some utilities are going to struggle. So part of our goal by standardizing certain aspects is that new practitioners of asset management within the wastewater sector do not feel like they are starting from scratch. And it also provides a way of ensuring some kind of uniformity across the state. We want to lower as many barriers as we can that may affect a successful program. So that's one side of the coin. The other side is that the purpose of the Clean Water Act and part of DEC's responsibilities is to prevent, protect, and restore our water bodies. And we have a duty to mitigate pollution. So ensuring compliance in a state of good repair means that utilities are thinking proactively about risk and are identifying those instances where intervention is warranted. We want to make sure that wastewater utilities have the tools to ensure compliance on their own, and much of it is going to be individualized and specific to the local needs. We also want to support and incentivize asset management practices. And we wondered, looking at these 4 bullets, we wondered if we had already developed all of these tools and if we were ready to move forward and start requiring that asset management programs be incorporated at wastewater utilities. So in consultation with that asset management subcommittee, we asked ourselves, have we provided sufficient resources? Our original guidance from 2015 was a very high level guidance, and it covered certain concepts of asset management program content, but did not provide specifics on development or implementation. We asked how we standardized our asset management practices. And again, it's hard to be standardized if you're non-specific. So the answer is no. And then for 3 and 4, will asset management programs be implemented, and how will we know? We really didn't have the answers to those questions. So we were missing some key parts of our asset management strategy, and we were not ready to just go forward, with requirements under one. And this leads us to our case study of the pilot program. So the objective of the pilot program was to test and improve our asset management guidance. And specifically within that, we wanted to learn the nuts and bolts. We wanted to identify areas for standardization, and we wanted to revise and improve guidance materials. By going through the pilot program, we hoped that we would be able to answer questions 1 and 2 on the previous slide, and we'd be able to fill in those blanks on questions 3 and 4. Maybe not completely answer them, but at least figure out a path forward. In addition to this overall objective, we also wanted to create a usable asset management program with municipal volunteers, generate interest in asset management, and build advocacy and credibility. It might be surprising to some of you to hear this, but we in state government sometimes get accused of working in a vacuum. So we wanted to make sure that we were not in a vacuum, but that we had real-time experience and input from people who are running the wastewater utilities and would be the ones using the asset management program. So at the beginning of the pilot program, we needed to find volunteers. We solicited many volunteers across the state, and we ultimately selected these 10 that are pictured. You can see the little pins that indicate where they're located. So we had a pretty good distribution across the state. We also needed to acquire an electronic database. Asset management programs incorporate a lot of information, and we needed a way to store it. We ended up moving forward with Maximo, which is an IBM product and might be familiar to those who are experienced with asset management. We liked that they had a long track record, and so we went forward with them. We also hired an asset management expert because we wanted a company that was familiar with asset management and would be able to help us have a successful asset management program. So we selected Barton and Lajudas for the pilot. This is an overview of all of the pilot tasks. I'm not going to be focusing on all of these. I'm just going to be looking at a couple of those specific tasks that were identified as worthy of standardization. And again, part of that goal of standardizing certain aspects was so that we can lower some barriers for new practitioners. So starting with task 2. Task 2 was the inventory of assets. The first step in an asset management program is knowing what you own. We started with the question, what is an asset? And we defined an asset as any component necessary to convey or treat wastewater. If you are in the wastewater sector, you'll probably agree that that could literally include everything and anything. So really the next step is to be specific about how you identify assets within your organization. The definition may change depending on the specifics of your customer base, of who you're serving. But in our guidance, at least, we have identified certain criteria to help narrow it down. For example, this includes something like an asset is anything that requires special ordering or a long lead time. If it takes a long time to get a part or equipment in, it should be in your inventory so that you know you'll need to plan in advance. And then the last kind of question on the slide is, how do you know what's critical? I find it kind of funny in retrospect because we titled this task Inventory of Critical Assets. And how do you know what's critical if you don't know what you have? You would really be able to answer that question after you perform your risk assessment, which I will go into in a few slides. For those of you who are unfamiliar again with the wastewater sector, this graphic here shows a process flow diagram for a treatment plant. You have your sewage enter the headworks, then it flows through, and then it ends up going out through into the water body. Task 3 was the condition of critical assets. And this is one area that we felt would be very helpful to standardize by following an asset classification review. Examples of asset classifications would be something like pumps, structures, compressors, and in this example, manholes. Each asset classification should include specific attributes that can be assessed. So examples in this case for manholes, an attribute would include corbel material. You can see the bricks here, for example. An asset or an attribute might be number of steps leading into the manhole. In this picture, I can count 2.5 because this middle one looks broken. There's other materials as well within a manhole, your cover material, your frame material, and so on. Each attribute has its own independent condition that can be reviewed. By using a standardized classification and attribute assessment, you reduce the risk that two people who look at the same asset will give different scores. If I look at a manhole and I give it a score of 2, and Matt looks at a manhole and gives it a score of 5, we may be looking at different attributes. Something's clearly off. When a condition assessment is performed in this manner, the resulting numeric value reflects an average of each of those attributes that exist within the asset class. So if there are 5 attributes, the resulting condition score is an average of those 5 attributes. So that was one area that we saw as something that we could help address, and we incorporated that lesson into our guidance material. So task 6 was levels of service, and I'll be curious if the next presentation talks about this at all, because this was a concept that we just really struggled with. Level of service really reflects the expectations of the wastewater utility stakeholders. These stakeholders may exist within the community or outside of the community. They're regulators. Levels of service are going to be very specific to the municipality and the wastewater utility because it is informed by specific circumstances within the community. Levels of service is an opportunity to involve stakeholders and provides a mechanism for accountability. If the end goal of an asset management program is to ensure that adequate resources exist so that we can act in a proactive manner, then providing the public with an opportunity to shape decisions should help if costs need to increase to deliver on the expected services. And level of service is another area that we've tried to standardize in part by identifying 4 categories of services, and these are depicted in this box. They include health and safety, system reliability, regulatory compliance, and fiscal impact. For each service category, there should be a goal that allows for performance tracking so that there be an opportunity for stakeholder feedback, and again, that kind of accountability aspect. Each service category also needs to balance the priorities that exist in the wastewater utility or municipality. You don't want to have everything weighted towards regulatory compliance, for example, because that's not a balanced approach to decision making. You'll see in this example that there are priority weightings that we have here that are out of 100% that should reflect the wastewater utility's values. During the risk assessment, each asset is assessed against these categories, weightings, and goals for relative impact. And I will say that in our pilot program, we did not see that there was a really clear mechanism to tie level of service to specific assets to actually have them inform any kinds of consequences of failure. And I'm going to show in the next slide how we've tried to make that connection. Tasks 7, 8, and 9 were likelihood of failure, consequence of failure, and risk. These 3 factors, which are multi-layered and incorporate many variables, should drive a utilities project. Likelihood of failure is exactly as it sounds. It is an estimate of how likely it is that a particular asset will fail. It reflects the service life or design life of assets, the installation date, and the remaining useful life. The remaining useful life may also incorporate a condition score that can extend or take away years from an asset's life. Some things are going to last longer than they're intended to, and it may not make sense to swap it out just because it's reached the end of its design life. By contrast, consequence of failure relates to the bottom line. If an asset fails, which stakeholders are going to be mad, and how important is that to your utility? Not all failures are equal. For example, a sewer that fails in a cul-de-sac is likely far less important than a sewer failing in an area that serves a hospital. This is where the level of service connection happens. Through consequence of failure scoring, assets can be directly related to impacts to stakeholder goals. The image to the right is an example of an impact definition. It shows how impacts can be compared to service categories and how consequences can be numerically derived. Our guidance provides ideas for developing an impact definition for wastewater utilities, because again, your impact definition is going to be dependent on what your goals are. And finally, for risk. Because risk is a calculated value, and because we wanted to see it scored out of 100, both the likelihood of failure and the consequence of failure are scored on a scale of 1 to 10, and risk is therefore just a calculation of the two. Task 17 was outreach, education, and training. I wanted to include a slide on it because in the pilot, we made sure to include an opportunity for our pilot communities to share the results of the asset management program to their elected officials, municipal officials, or the public. Each wastewater utility chose its own venue. The importance of this task cannot be overstated. The challenge for us in the wastewater sector is that our level of awareness about the importance of wastewater and our needs is not always obvious to the general public or municipal officials. So we know that an effective asset management program needs to provide a mechanism to inform the public. Many of our pilot communities started taking proactive measures as a result of their participation in the pilot program. Some have raised rates, some have hired staff, some have identified information gaps in the plans to collect the data, and some have even launched plans to expand the asset management program to other utilities that they own or manage. This graphic here just shows a snip from an executive summary that we developed as part of the pilot program. Each of the municipalities had this, and they shared this at the meetings that they held. It was about a 10-page document that just talked about some of the high-level concepts of what they had accomplished. So if you remember at the beginning, I talked about, that we had a few outcomes that we wanted to see from the pilot program. We wanted to learn the nuts and bolts of asset management. We wanted to identify areas for standardization, and we wanted to revise and improve our guidance material. We feel that we, have been successful in identifying some of those areas. This right here is actually a snip from our guidance document. Each chapter includes just like a chapter deliverables at the top that talks about the minimum components that you can expect to come out of after completing the chapter, and also identifies best practices. Not everybody needs to be running right at the beginning, so we wanted to at least provide a mechanism so people could walk first, and then, if you're ambitious, you can start running. So I think overall we met our expectations for the pilot program. To start an asset management program, you don't need to have all the answers, but you do need to plan to get the answers, even if it's a long way out. And that was really a big takeaway that we took from the pilot program. So our next steps is to actually release the DEC guidance document. I gave all of you a little bit of a preview of some of the parts of the guidance document and some of the things that, that we incorporated. So next step is to get that guidance out the door. We also anticipate performing some trainings on the guidance materials. We want to build the number of utilities that are practicing asset management, and we want to solicit feedback. Since we've talked about, I've talked about today the importance of having the stakeholder feedback, and we recognize that we have a lot of stakeholders that want to have an opportunity to shape our direction. And it would be contrary if we did not also expect kind of that same kind of feedback loop. So with that is my presentation. And I think I will send it not to Pam, but Pam Alardo is up next. And I'm going to give it, though, to David. And Pam works for the Department of Environmental Protection. I'm looking forward to seeing your presentation.
Thanks. Hey, thanks, Terry. Hey, thank you, everybody, for joining us on this this session, and thank you, Dave, for controlling my slides. I just want to stay on the first slide for a little bit. If you can make it in presentation mode. That would be even better. But yeah, I'm Pam Alardo. So for the last 5 years, I've been running the largest and oldest wastewater utility in the country, which is that of New York City. We have 13 wastewater resource recovery facilities. I've got 1,800 staff. I've got a lot of assets. Only been here 5 years, but I spent most of my career in the Seattle King County area. I ran the wastewater division for Metropolitan Seattle for at the end of my 15 years in that group. 15 years before that, I worked for the Department of Environmental Conservation, the Washington State version of it. So I kind of have a full circle kind of career in many senses. But our city, like many cities, face multiple problems. We have aging infrastructure, and the science of asset management and the practice and the knowledge sharing really is a key, a pathway to success. I want to give 4 things that I have concluded about asset management. 1, asset management principles are a science that are essential to our success as a utility. 2, leading an organization along asset management principles and program maturity is a way to lead change. There are good 3, there are good resources for leading change that we could adopt, and this kind of adoption requires a lot of intentionality, persistence, and aligned with asset management principles can lead us to success. And finally, 4, the benefits can be phenomenal. I believe David Kraft used the term asset management nirvana, if I heard you correctly, and that would be the ultimate outcome of the whole endeavor. So I'm going to show 2 slides next on just quickly some aging infrastructure snaps here. So Dave, if you don't mind clicking next. Thank you. Here's some pipes that have been around for a long time. The one on the left is a pipe that's wrapped in fiberglass that is still springing a leak. Again, we have a lot of old infrastructure in our utility. The next one is a couple more pictures where you see another pipe, I believe, but also an example of emergency maintenance for a buried pipe. Can you go next, Dave? Yeah, there we go. And that's just an example with the aging infrastructure and assets that some of which we can't even inspect. There can be some serious problems, as we know, and corrective maintenance is a daily reality in our example. So next slide, please, Dave. So I'm going to talk about the sort of the conditions or the strategy around asset management, just super high level. I'm not going to get into any big details, but part of the first step is to really create a vision and a strategy for rolling out, getting our staff and our organization aligned with asset management principles and the change management that needs to follow. So first of all, before a vision, there's always good to have a mission about what we do. I don't necessarily want to read this slide, but basically we protect public health and we really improve the environment from the work that we do. And I think there's a vision statement following, and this is the key. So the vision is really to advance the state of good repair, advance the ability of our equipment to perform. How? 2 points, engaged employees and utilizing responsible asset management, with the real vision for us to become a leader in wastewater resource recovery. So that's a lot said, and it really elevated asset management to the forefront of our consciousness when we developed this mission and vision. Next slide. And the next slide is just talking about, how do you do this? Okay, how do you create this change and how do you push it through an organization? And the first thing is to really define that there is a need. There's a quote I got out of a book that said, the status quo is more dangerous than the unknown. And when there's resistance to change, when the status quo is a difficult situation, you have to push the unknown as a preferred alternative. It takes organizational leadership to create that vision, which is the next one, and creating a platform by which you can move it through by guiding the process, vision and strategy, empower employees for action. And as leaders, we need to remove obstacles to people generating ideas or developing new ways of doing things that actually improve our business. So that's a big role of leadership throughout the entire organization, but actually focusing on the ground up employees for that assistance. Generate and document progress. You know, there's short-term wins, but a long-term vision. I like some of Matt's slides where he had the short, medium, and sort of long-term concept on that one page. And it's important to do that because you have to have the little wins to sustain the momentum for the long-term work that we have to do. Make it part of the culture. Anchoring any change within the culture is always challenging. I use the term sustain the gain, and it's actually, it has to be intentional and has to be the forefront of our consciousness. And communicate. Next click, Dave. Communicate, communicate, communicate is my final message. One of Matt, again, excellent slides. I liked how you displayed the top down and the bottom up. And I don't see those as necessarily choices. I see those as the whole program where you have to do it from both sides. And I think traditionally it's easy for an organization to look at the top down because there's books on it and it sounds good and you can actually make it sound pretty darn good. But if it's not coming from the bottom up, it's not coming from the field, and it's not coming from the people who really understand the work, it's not going to be successful. Oh, 3 quick ones next. I have this great graph, which I stole from Dave Juergens. By the way, I used to work with Dave Juergens in King County, and he's fantastic. I learned more from him than I believe he probably learned from me. But this is a graph. You've seen stuff like this. I use this in budget meetings. I'm like, this is what happens if you put assets in the ground, but you don't really have a strong asset management program. In the long term, it costs you more. My goal is this next slide, Dave. I feel like magic. Okay, you fill this little gap in the front, and you do better planned maintenance. You do the basic principles that we've been talking about today, and you save the area under the curve on the next for the rest of the asset's life. The next slide is a picture of Nirvana asset management. It's a dream, it's a fantasy at this stage in my life, but you know, I think Matt has seen this, and Dave has seen it in his dreams. But this is really the ultimate goal that if I can get to the second one, I'd be thrilled. So I'm going to stop there. I'm sorry if I took too long, David Juergens, but please take over from here. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Pam. I'll just go ahead and continue. So I'm Dave Juergens. I'm the operations assistant manager for the operations side of the house when it comes to professional and technical groups with King County over here with Seattle on the quote unquote left coast. This is we're going to be really kind of nailing this down. We've heard an awful lot of technicals on here, a lot of the building blocks, a lot of the regulatory side. And I've really tailored this discussion to kind of go over our own journey, as I say, to the precision domain, and really what I think were the most successful elements to get us where we are, and as well as kind of piggyback on a lot of what Pam was saying when it comes to sustainability and improving and continuing that. And one of the things that, you know, I came to King County as a retired nuclear engineer from the Navy, and they had an advertisement for a reliability engineer, and they were just starting this brand new program called Maintenance Best Practices. And one of the things that it really helped is to get me in on the ground floor of a system that really had not been built yet. And it's interesting because when I see a lot of the slides that have come through today, you know, there is no recipe for this. And I think that's the first thing to understand is you can't cookie cutter it. Every organization is slightly different. It has different barriers, different challenges to deal with. And honestly, coming out of the reliability world, most of these efforts actually fail before they succeed. And it's really important to keep that in mind as you begin the journey, is that it is not easy. And and the bigger the organization, the more the bureaucracy, the harder it gets. So I'm going to really concentrate on some of the ground, kind of the ground level work we did, what made us successful, and really try to sow some seeds that everyone can use to sort of to use. And if it looks like it has some legs on it, or cast it aside, one or the other, because what works for me may not work for everybody. So first off is just a little bit about us real quick. We're running 5 waste treatment plants. We've got about 340 plus miles of conveyance piping. We run 2 small plants, and as well as 3 larger plants, including one that's a membrane plant in the north region. And as part of this program, we've grown an asset database from around 8,000 when I first came in around 2008 to right around 55,000 assets right now that were cataloged in our computer maintenance management system. Asset management was certainly not something new to the county when I arrived. It goes all the way back to the 1960s. Interestingly enough, in our journey, you mentioned the Hurricane Sandy. That was a real catalyst for the pilot up in New York State. For us, it was really the threat of privatization at the time, I think. And we sort of started looking at some major failures that we're having with existing infrastructure, and a strong desire to start combating that. And I often look at capital, and don't hold this against me, Pam, but it's kind of like the proverbial child in the toy store. We look at the nice shiny objects that we want to build, the new membrane treatment plants and the more efficient ways of doing of equipment of putting in. And it's very easy for us as an organization to overlook our existing infrastructure. So really our primary goal when we started with maintenance best practices was move from a reactive to a proactive. And I think I've heard that earlier, I think in Matt's slide. And that was something that was pervasive, not just data, not just looking at the data, but also looking at the culture. There's a significant amount of folks that they love to don that firefighting hat. They love to go ahead and attack that fire happening. And it actually becomes almost part of the maintenance culture on the ground floor. And so getting them on board early in finding a better way to manage maintenance and things that are going to make their lives easier and demonstrably give the data to demonstrate that, it's a tough sell. But in the early phases, we were really looking for some data, accurate data, get life cycles down, and really standardize what we did across the board. And it's tough to do, especially with plants that are managed by different managers. They have a different way of seeing things, and getting them all on the same page was probably one of the biggest challenges. Oops, okay. So simultaneously, asset management and maintenance best practices became a partnership. And it really came to the reliability engineers that were hired at the plant. They're essentially taking ownership of the computer maintenance management system because it really did not have any sort of caretaker or administrator that was that understood the maintenance and the actions that were going into it. And the asset management side of the house, which was concerned with a very much higher up, looking at funding, looking at capitalization, and really trying to build a cohesive strategic asset management plan, a SAMP, as we say. And the more we started working together with asset management from a reliability perspective on the maintenance side of the house, we both came to realize that we're both feeders and we're both recipients of each other's deliverables. It's that symbiotic relationship that really has to exist. Otherwise, it's the standard engineering model. It looks great on paper, Once you put it into practice, reality hits. And no matter how good of an engineer you are, you're always going to learn those lessons when you go into practice. So the SAMP philosophy, as we started building on it, we really made an outreach effort to bring in the reliability professionals, what they did, how they maintained the assets, what predictive maintenance was going in, what we really needed to capture, and really understanding that a given is that 60 to 70% of reliability is determined at the design level. Once we buy it, once we commission it and accept it, we own it. And other than the few times that we could possibly re-engineer something that's already been installed, which is extremely rare, successfully, it became real apparent we had to get in on the ground floor in the pre-design phases of projects. And as you can see from here, 10% through as-built adherence, 10 to 20% through installation, and finally 10% of that comes through commissioning. So it really hits all areas of the organization as we do our projects and we start bringing our projects to fruition and giving them over to O&M to take ownership of them. And the key really on this is that the data collection and the work processes had to be written. They had to be documented, and they had to be standardized. And everybody had to come into agreement with those standards, as well as the definitions behind those standards before we applied them. So defining best practices, we had a long ways to go. Where are we? How bad is it, Doc? We ended up hiring a third-party consultant to come in and do some benchmarking for us, find out what the best of the best are doing, and really get into deep as far as what the real picture is. How bad is our current CMMS system? How bad is our asset database? Where are those areas that we need to improve on when it comes to employee skill sets? How much detail are the maintenance folks putting on the work orders to help give us a trail of breadcrumbs as to why this asset is becoming quote unquote a bad actor? It's failing. Its life cycle is not meeting its engineered life cycle. What is the appropriate level of preventative and predictive maintenance? Once again, that gets into a little bit we talked about earlier with levels of risk and consequence of failure, and what we call criticality in our model. And then what metrics are being tracked, and are they provable? And comparing it against other wastewater programs in the industry, and to get that best practice defined and really get into really the meat of it, which is a gap analysis. Let's find out where it is. This is actually a screenshot of our initial flyover here of our system, and this is just a small snippet. Pam, you probably recognize this. Of about a 100-page report, getting into all different aspects of maintenance, all different aspects of how we document our work practices, what metrics we have, what kind of employee training do we have, what are the specialties of our subject matter experts, and really to give us that sober look at from the organization from an asset management and reliability standpoint. And we went ahead and after going through a lot of review, began some action items. And it really started with getting the documentation down. And one of the best things that we have now that we didn't have then, back then we had what was called PAS 55, that some of you may recognize. That was the initial formulation of the ISO 55000. I think it's 55000 or 55002 now. And so we really wanted to get the documentation down and get folks in the room to come to agreement as to everything from definitions to actions. And we also had to go ahead and get senior management involved from the get-go. They needed to chair, they needed to be the decision makers of these steering committees. Anybody that tells you that asset management will not take any resources, no, you have to have a commitment from the top to really staff it and staff it effectively. And and then also bring in the stakeholders to those meetings. So we actually had stakeholders that were from the craft areas. And in fact, I would search out who is the most vocal, who is the most outspoken, who is the most culturally embedded, and bring them into it because they have to own it. Manage the outreach. And this was a biggie, is that you want to put it in lights so that everybody from your utility workers to senior management can say, I recognize that program. I get what it's going for. And so from the get-go, we started what we called a Wrench Times magazine. It was published monthly. What are we doing? How are we doing it? And of course, you get the chance to get photo ops and with the crafts and doing things on the ground floor, and they appreciate that. And then the real nuts and bolts is when you're getting down to getting your workflows. How do we do business now? Because if you don't know how you're doing business now, it's going to be very tough to improve on it. And then we've worked our way through looking at the accountability actions. So in other words, you see this in politics a lot, where you'll look for dependencies to get developed between various programs and various deliverables. And in this case, we really had to look at how can we get that accountability built in to the deliverables from asset management. So we had a thing called a balanced scorecard. This is something that would go all the way up to the county executive. We said, would it be a great idea if we can incorporate some of the key performance indicators or metrics that we're working on into this report, while at the same time, let's look at what the business plans are, the annual business plans that we did on each of the 5 treatment plants, to say, how do we get a consistency from those plants to tie that into their business plan as well? So you can see we're kind of going through an element of connect the dots. And then worked into developing the maintenance asset life cycle. What is the appropriate life cycle? And that was an exercise in itself, because you can go into industry publications. They can give you, a vertical, centrifugal pump should have an arbitrary life cycle assignment of, say, 15 years. Well, is the pump operating on and off, or is it running on a variable frequency drive? How's the grit content of what it's pumping? What kind of materials is in it? And so we started looking at the feeders to make those asset life cycles realistic. And that's where it really came down to having reliability engineers on the front lines that could be able to work with the SMEs and work with the crafts to really get a solid idea of how much is this wearing, as well as work order reviews, and looking at how many what we call corrective maintenance work orders are being written against these types of assets to really get an intelligent input into it. Optimizing and utilization of the CMMS or your enterprise asset management system, probably one of the biggest parts of this. We are only good as the data we have. Memories are short, and when it comes to our data, it was bad. It was real bad. And we always think of asset management I always thought of it as kind of glamorous, same with reliability engineering, you're doing the technical, you're figuring that out. But really, when you get down to the bread and butter of it, when you're starting this process, it's going out into the field and it's scrawling on pieces of paper, model numbers, make, manufacturer, dates. You're trying to collect all that data that never was collected from those projects. And it was probably, I'd say at least a 4 to 5 year process in just getting to an acceptable level of assets and asset data in the system to be able to really leverage it. Driving procurement of resources, and this was one we had to look at. Okay, planners, schedulers. That's why I put IMPs there, or reliability engineers, parts support, who manages bill of materials. All of those aspects get put into it. And then finally, engaging all your contributors, making sure that they understand how they fit into the big picture. And once again, I mentioned third-party consultant we brought in any culturally embedded organization. As much as I often see consultants brought in unnecessarily in many cases, this is one where you really want to think hard about it. A consultant specializes in asset management, but more so organizational change, because this is where it takes change agents. You're really trying to break down those barriers, those silos. So the fourth thing, as I mentioned, we have the 55,001 standard. It gives us a great framework. I'm not going to spend any time talking about it, but I just wanted to put this in real quick. This looks similar to one of the other slides I think I saw earlier, where it kind of brings it all together here, and it's a great building block to start looking at your own organizations. One of the big things for sustainment, and so as Pam says, sustain the gain, and I say, well, grabbing for the higher fruit. And you've got your lower fruit, continue doing it. One of the things that's going on, and this is how should I say, we're in progress, and we're always going to be in progress. We're always going to be going to that utopic slide, I think, that you showed, Pam, at the end there, is recognizing those touch points. And an asset touches just about every aspect of the waste treatment organization, both on the capital side and the O&M side to some degree. That means that you're going into other people's areas of expertise or other groups' areas of expertise, and you're saying, hey, I'm asset management. Hard to get them to open the door willingly. And so recognizing where those are, where those silos are, and where those areas that you have to get them engaged. We talk about engaged employees. It's engaged on all levels, and being able to determine that at the beginning makes it a lot easier to invite them to the table and have those discussions. I lost my mouse. There we go. Another element of sustaining the gain is connecting the dots. We talked about building interdependencies. This on the left is what I would consider our reliability arena here. That's our CMMS. And the feeders to that. We talk about predictive maintenance, O&M budgets, product support, obsolescence, mean time between failures, condition assessments. There's a lot of other stuff I could put in there, but this is in the reliability world. This is where your reliability engineers are really looking at the work that's happening on the assets and making sure it's getting captured appropriately. And then we talk about the feeders. So we have a project management system, as we call portfolio. Most large utilities do, and this would be what we would call, what we say is a deliverable to that project in the form of the new project request forms that come in. So if I'm going to go ahead and elicit a new project, there are deliverables that I have to pull out of the CMMS, or the Enterprise Asset Management System, to support that project, to ensure we're not replacing assets before their life cycle is due. And if we are, then are we asking the question why? Is there a root cause analysis or a failure modes and effects analysis that we need to have the reliability engineers perform on this if it's a pricey asset and rises to that level of criticality? The other feeders we worked on is a direct feeder into our capital replacement forecast. So this is in the last probably 4 years we've been building, and this is designed to really capture what our replacements and upgrades are looking like on the asset side of the house by year. We started going for 100 years, but 100 years are just too crazy. So we limited it to 50 years. But this feeder here is critical when we talk about getting the budget prepared for these impending replacements that are coming due. And we involve the reliability engineers in this process each year. So each year that comes about, we'll see another group of assets, typically 5 years from now, come into the window, and the reliability engineers go through each of those assets, the costly ones, and perform an evaluation on them. Is this really ready for replacement? In this case, we're at 2026, or can we let it ride? The finance folks get involved in this as well. We say, well, there's a big bow wave right here. I wonder why that is. Well, we just commissioned one of our newer treatment plants, the Wastewater treatment plant, and it just so happens a lot of the assets life cycles are coinciding at this year. How can we flatten that bow wave? How can we make that less of a ding on the budget, and we don't have to talk putting a supplemental or something together to take care of that. And then finally, getting the metrics published. So we want to lay those expectations out there. That's part of our level of service we talked about earlier. What can we expect? And having those metrics go all the way up to county council now. And so this chain here is, it really keeps, it's kind of like that system of checks and balances back in civics class. You're really designing this to where one supports the other. How am I looking on time? I'll continue until I see the big white cane come out and pull me.
We're actually out of time, but we're good. Another minute or so there.
Okay, so some other elements, this is kind of brain droppings here. Continue refinement and identify those key resources. It's going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to build. If you start with a pilot, obviously you're going to be building on that pilot. You're also looking at, I'm sorry, I just clogged my screen here. Vital the top level management continues to stay committed to this and drive the decision making on this. You know, a lot of times, you know, they're charged with time. It's hard to get. Somebody once told me you got about 14 seconds to make your point with the director, and then he's going to move on. And so you got to keep their attention on this. Communicate every chance you get, whether we're slideshows, periodicals, road shows, face to face. Get that communication from top down and bottom up. As well as building your level of service. And then I'm just going to pick on a few highlights here. Incorporate your life cycle and risk consideration into all projects. And this is including this is along with the ROI. When I first got to the King County, that was all that we really cared about was what's my return on investment, not what is my risk exposure. And so that's a question that gets asked a lot. And finally, take a plan, do, check, act approach. This is something that ISO 55000 talks religiously about. You always want to be able to trust it's happening, but verify and make it better if you can, because very rarely do we ever get it right the first time. And in a nutshell, that is it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, David, and thanks everybody. Really great presentations. I know there's a few questions out there from the group and to some folks. So the ones that are specific to certain presentations, I think we'll handle through the question box. But I did see one that I thought was interesting for the whole group here from Andrew, and I will read it if I can pull it up here. For each of the presenters, where have you taken and applied best practice from what you have been from that side? I'll just kind of rephrase this, best practice from outside the wastewater or water industry. Have you used outside industry best practices at all?
You mean outside the wastewater industry?
Yes, that's right.
So I can take it first. I mean, the two main routes that I've gotten it, one is organizations like IAM, where you're exposed to folks in other industries and can collaborate. And then the second, just in consulting in general, I mean, I work for a civil engineering firm that's just focused on water, wastewater. And so internally, we have an asset management group where I collaborate with folks who are in other industries. And so we kind of compare notes, compare tools, software, all that kind of stuff.
I'd like to comment that Dave's presentation was just bringing back so many warm memories for me. So I was there in the beginning when we had Genesis, the consultant, on board, and I was working at the West Point treatment plant at the time. And so I was close to the action on the ground. And it was the time when we also figured out we needed to hire the professionals in the field. So if you look at it from that perspective, we hired a bunch of RCMEs, reliability center maintenance engineers. I can't remember how many are total. There's like 4 or something, but they all came from the Navy. So I would say in my life, I've relied heavily on the professionals from the armed services, particularly the Navy in that sense. Because they came, ready to go. Fantastic resource. highly recommend it.
It was funny when I saw the job opening, I said, I know what that stuff is. We've been doing that for 20 years. But we do bring a lot of what I've brought obviously comes out of the Navy and the nuclear field. I think the other aspect of it is from the transit. Transit's using a lot of new technology these days when we talk about bus routes, especially, and are they on schedule or are they behind schedule? And they're using passive and active RFID. And those are aspects that we've been able to incorporate and are looking to continue to grow into our system. So imagine, for example, a large expensive impeller gets removed and put into the shop. If you have a passive RFID tag to it, you know exactly where it's at and when it came in. So lots of promise.
Love it.
I'm looking through the rest of the questions. I think they're all, there's others, and I'm kind of monitoring the chat and the questions. I don't see any others. No, don't. So considering we're at time already, I know we kind of planned to end this at 6:30. We dragged a little bit, but thanks everybody for attending. Thanks for hanging in there to hear great presentations. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Carrie, Pam, David. Really great job.
Yes,
welcome. Hope to have you back. Hopefully you come to meetings going forward as well. We'd love to have you still join. And then, Sean, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Nope, you covered it well. All the best. I hope you'll continue to drop in, David. We'll be happy to have you. You can give us feedback on what's happening at the big end. But
absolutely.
Thanks again to all of our presenters. It was great education in another area.
So I have one question. When is the next New York branch meeting?
I'll leave that to Sean, but I think we're trying. The plan is always to do 2 a year. We always spring and fall is what we try to do. Although there's I heard some whispers that we might do, if vaccinations continue on the path that they are, maybe a quick live get together somewhere in the summer. If vaccinations kind of come across nicely. So
exactly, that's what we're hoping. So if we wind up doing something in the fall, and then either the summer or sometime while the weather's still nice, as we're in a place that we can get together for real, that would be a great sort of welcome back a little bit. So we're hoping to do something like that.
Sounds good.
There have been several questions here towards the end just popping in. Will this be made available? That's one of the benefits, again, of doing things online. The reason why we chose this format at the end of the day was because it can be recorded. This was being recorded, and it will be made available through the IAM. I think it might take a few days, but it will be out there. So we'll loop back everyone in on that one, definitely. All right.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks all. Appreciate it, and be well, be safe, and hope to see you again in the near future. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much, all. Stay well. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Hi, everybody.